It's not every day you see a Toyota Land Cruiser attempting to become a submarine, especially not in your own private lake, not with its owner, our illustrious HOA President Brenda Higgins, still scrambling out of the passenger side like a startled swamp hen. But Brenda, bless her aggressively floral-scented heart, was always full of surprises, most of them unwelcome. This is the story of how my downhill lawn, in a sun-baked state where proper rain is about as common as a truly humble politician, became her pride and joy's most formidable and ultimately final parking spot. How did we get here, you ask? Well, pull up a chair, maybe grab a cold one, and definitely drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Because this particular saga of suburban warfare, this one needs to be heard to be believed. I still get a shiver, not entirely unpleasant, thinking about the precise moment that expensive hunk of Japanese engineering started its dignified, yet utterly doomed, slide. My name is Mark, and until about 3 years ago, my life in the Oakwood Creek community was the suburban dream realized. I'm an aerospace engineer by trade. I design things that are meant to fly, or at least function flawlessly under extreme stress, which, ironically, became my guiding principle in dealing with Brenda. My property was my sanctuary, a comfortable, well-built house, and my pride and joy, a sprawling emerald green lawn that sloped gently downwards towards a small, man-made lake teeming with impossibly cheerful lily pads and the occasional lazy turtle. We're talking a good 30-degree incline in some places, a feature I rather liked for the view and the drainage. Living in Southern California, proper rain is a whispered legend, so that lawn, despite its gradient, was usually firm, almost crisp underfoot. You could host a garden party on it without a single stiletto sinking an inch. It was perfect. Too perfect, as it turned out, for someone like Brenda Higgins. Brenda wasn't just an HOA president. She was an HOA empress. She'd moved into Oakwood Creek about a year after I did and had somehow charismaed or bulldozed her way to the presidency within 6 months. Picture this: mid-50s, perpetually clad in eye-wateringly expensive athleisure wear that looked like it had never seen the inside of a gym, her face a carefully maintained mask of benevolent condescension, usually hidden behind sunglasses the size of small dinner plates. Her weapon of choice? A metallic charcoal Toyota Land Cruiser, always polished to a mirror shine, driven with the kind of breezy entitlement that suggested traffic laws and private property lines were merely quaint suggestions for lesser mortals. The first incident was innocuous enough, almost forgettable, if it hadn't been the seed of a much larger, muddier tree of conflict. Brenda was conducting one of her infamous community beautification walkabouts, which mostly involved her striding down the sidewalks, peering critically at everyone's rose bushes, occasionally accompanied by her poodle, Fifi, who possessed a similar air of judgmental superiority. She'd pulled up in front of my neighbor's house, old Mrs. Gable, who was, I suspect, one of Brenda's few genuine friends, or at least someone who tolerated her. Brenda's Land Cruiser was parked, just the passenger side tires, mind you, barely kissing the edge of my meticulously edged lawn. I happened to be outside, deadheading some roses, a therapeutic activity that would soon be overshadowed by less pleasant horticultural concerns. "Morning, Brenda," I'd called out, amiable enough. "Lovely day for an inspection." She gave me a regal nod, the kind a monarch might bestow upon a particularly clean peasant. "Mark," she acknowledged, "just ensuring standards are maintained." I gestured vaguely, with my pruning shears towards her front wheel. "Would you mind just keeping off the grass if possible? Trying to keep it looking its best." A flicker of something, annoyance, crossed her face before being smoothed over by that patented sugary smile. "Oh, of course, dear. Just for a moment. Such a wide vehicle, you understand." She didn't move it. That was the first little pebble in what would become an avalanche of aggravation. I remember thinking, it's just a couple of tires. Just this once. Oh, how naive I was. Engineering complex systems that hurtle through the atmosphere? Piece of cake. Understanding the territorial imperatives of an HOA Karen? Rocket science had nothing on that. Soon, just for a moment, became her standard operating procedure. She'd visit Mrs. Gable 2 or 3 times a week, and invariably, that Land Cruiser would find its way onto my lawn. Sometimes just the edge, sometimes a good foot or two onto the grass. It was like she was testing the waters, or rather, my turf. My initial annoyance morphed into a low hum of irritation. I'm a pretty laid-back guy, generally. I choose my battles. But this felt like a deliberate, if petty, encroachment. My lawn wasn't a communal parking lot. It wasn't a wider shoulder for her convenience. It was my lawn, the polite requests continued. Each time I saw her or her vehicle making its unwelcome impression on my fescue, I'd try. Brenda, please, the lawn. Or, Brenda, could you park on the street? There's plenty of space. Each request was met with a variation of her initial brush-off. Just popping in. Or, the street is so uneven, bad for Fifi's delicate paws when she gets out. Fifi, I might add, was usually carried. The excuses were flimsy, paper-thin justifications for sheer laziness and a breathtaking sense of entitlement. I even left a polite, carefully worded note on her windshield once, hoping the written word might penetrate where spoken appeals had failed. Dear Miss Higgins, a friendly reminder to please refrain from parking on my lawn. Thank you for your cooperation. Mark, my address. The next day, she parked a foot further onto the grass, the note presumably residing in her Land Cruiser's capacious trash receptacle, or perhaps framed in her powder room as a testament to her defiance. I started to suspect this wasn't just thoughtlessness. This was a power play, however minor league. And I, the quiet engineer who just wanted to cultivate his roses and enjoy his lake view, was her unwitting opponent in a game I hadn't even realized I was playing. My meticulously planned Saturday mornings, usually reserved for blueprint reviews or designing a more efficient sprinkler system for my vegetable garden, were now increasingly consumed by Brenda watching and simmering resentment. The pristine slope of my lawn, once a source of aesthetic pleasure, was becoming a battleground, its green expanse a constant reminder of Brenda's territorial incursions. The piece of Oakwood Creek was slowly, but surely, being eroded, one illegal parking job at a time. And the worst part? I was starting to realize that Brenda wasn't just ignoring me, she was enjoying it. There was a certain smirk she wore, a glint in her eye when she caught me looking, that spoke volumes. It said, I am Brenda Higgins, HOA president, and your lawn is my footrest. This could not, and would not, stand. The engineer in me, the part that craved order and respected defined parameters, was beginning to wake up. My attempts to engage Brenda directly having proven utterly futile, my next logical step, or so I naively thought, was to appeal to the very body she presided over, the Oakwood Creek Homeowners Association. I drafted a polite, almost painstakingly neutral email. Dear HOA board members, it began, I am writing to request your assistance with a recurring issue. The HOA president, Ms. Brenda Higgins, has been consistently parking her vehicle on my private property, specifically the lawn area at my address, despite multiple verbal requests and a written note asking her to desist. This occurs most frequently when she visits the adjacent property. I have attached photographs documenting several recent instances. While I am keen to maintain neighborly relations, this continued trespassing is causing damage to my lawn and constitutes an infringement on my property rights. I would appreciate the board's intervention in ensuring that all residents, including board members, respect private property boundaries as outlined, I'm sure, in our community guidelines. Sincerely, Mark. I hit send. A small, hopeful part of me imagining a sternly worded memo from the board secretary to Brenda, perhaps a sheepish apology from her. What I received instead, a week later, after a follow-up nudge from my end, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic buck-passing, undoubtedly dictated by Brenda herself and typed up by poor, timid Sylvia, the HOA secretary, a woman who looked perpetually startled. The email read, Dear Mr. My Name, thank you for your correspondence. The Oakwood Creek HOA encourages all residents to resolve minor disputes amicably and directly with their neighbors. The HOA's purview typically does not extend to parking matters on private property, unless such parking obstructs common areas, shared driveways, or poses a direct violation of a specific CCR clause pertaining to vehicle placement on individually owned lots that impacts community aesthetics or safety as a whole. We trust you and Ms. Higgins can find a mutually agreeable understanding. Regards, the Oakwood Creek HOA Board. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it almost took my breath away. She, as president, was using the HOA to tell me that the HOA couldn't do anything about her breaking the spirit, if not the explicit letter, of neighborly conduct, while simultaneously hiding behind the HOA's supposed impotence. It was a masterclass in weaponized bureaucracy. This wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about an abuse of power, however small scale. That email was a turning point. The velvet gloves, if they were ever truly on, were now decidedly off, at least in my mind. Brenda, emboldened by the HOA's official non-stance, which she'd orchestrated, seemed to take it as a green light. Her Land Cruiser started to appear on my lawn with greater frequency and for longer durations. It was no longer just a couple of tires. She was practically angling it as if my lawn were her personal valet spot, the slope a mere inconvenience for her powerful vehicle. I started noticing faint but undeniable tire tracks, indentations in the soil, that screamed of repeated compression. The gentle charm of my downhill lawn was being marred by these vehicular footprints of contempt. My frustration began to curdle into a cold, focused anger. This woman, this suburban Napoleon in Lululemon, was not just disrespecting my property, she was mocking me. My engineering brain, usually occupied with thrust-to-weight ratios and stress tolerances, began to divert significant processing power to what I internally dubbed the Brenda problem. The first step, clearly, was documentation. If the HOA wouldn't act, I needed a record, an undeniable litany of her transgressions. So, my smartphone became my closest ally. Every single time that charcoal Land Cruiser sullied my green, I was there. Photos from my office window, photos from the porch, photos from discreet angles behind my prize-winning azaleas. Each photo meticulously time-stamped, sometimes with a short video clip showing her either parking or driving away, often with a jaunty wave if she spotted me. I started a log: date, time of arrival, time of departure, exact location of parking, e.g., front passenger and driver tires 1 full meter onto lawn, adjacent to the third sprinkler head. It sounds obsessive, and perhaps it was, but I had a feeling this level of detail would be important. When dealing with someone who operates in a fog of self-serving justifications, clarity and irrefutable facts are your best weapons. While building my archive of Brenda's bad behavior, I dived deep into the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CCRs, that sacred, often incomprehensible, tome that governs life in planned communities. I read every tedious page, highlighter in hand. Was there anything at all, about parking on another resident's lawn? Not explicitly, no. But there was plenty of boilerplate about maintaining community harmony, respecting fellow residents, and avoiding nuisance behaviors. There were clauses about the HOA's duty to enforce the rules fairly and impartially. Oh, the irony! I cross-referenced this with local city and county ordinances. Trespassing was clearly defined. Damage to private property, even seemingly minor like rutted grass, was actionable. I confirmed my property lines with the survey map I'd received when I bought the house. I even went out one evening with a tape measure and discreetly placed a few almost invisible landscape staples at the precise boundary. The next time Brenda parked, her front left tire was a good 6 inches inside those markers. She hadn't just crossed a line, she'd driven over it with impunity. It was then I decided on a more direct, formal approach. Forget the HOA board. They were clearly her puppets. I needed to put Brenda Higgins, the individual, on notice. I consulted briefly with my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a retired litigator with a mind still as sharp as a tack. He listened patiently, a twinkle in his eye, as I recounted my woes. "Mark," he'd said, puffing on his pipe, "you've got a classic case of what we lawyers call being right but getting steamrollered. What you do on your property is your business. She's trespassing. Plain and simple. Send her a cease and desist. Registered mail, return receipt requested. Make it polite but firm. Can't hurt to have it on record." So, I drafted the letter. Not an angry tirade, but a cool, factual statement of intent. "Dear Ms. Higgins," it stated, "this letter serves as a formal and final request for you to cease and desist from parking your vehicle, a Toyota Land Cruiser, license plate," I'd noted it down, of course, "on my private property located at my address. This unauthorized parking, specifically on the lawn area, has occurred on numerous documented occasions, including but not limited to, I listed 5 recent dates, referencing the photographic evidence I possessed. Despite my previous verbal requests and a written note, this activity has continued, causing damage to my lawn and constituting an ongoing trespass. Please be advised that should this unauthorized parking continue beyond your receipt of this letter, I will be compelled to explore all available legal remedies to protect my property rights, which may include but are not limited to seeking injunctive relief and damages for any harm caused. I trust that we can resolve this matter definitively and without further escalation. Sincerely, Mark." I sent it via registered mail, a satisfying thud as the postal clerk stamped it. The little green return receipt card came back a few days later, signed by Brenda herself. The next day, her Land Cruiser was back on my lawn, parked with an almost celebratory defiance, practically halfway to my prize-winning rose bushes this time. She even honked twice, a cheerful little beep-beep, as she got out. She wasn't just ignoring my warning, she was thumbing her nose at it. That evening, feeling a mix of fury and a strange sort of calm determination, I found myself staring at the slope of my lawn, then down towards the placid, shimmering surface of my little lake. An idea, audacious and slightly unhinged, began to take root in the fertile soil of my exasperation. The engineer in me started doing calculations. The downhill gradient, the lush grass, the proximity of a convenient body of water, it was almost too perfect. Operation Slippery Slope was about to enter the design phase. The final straw, the incident that propelled Operation Slippery Slope from a vengeful daydream into a meticulously planned engineering project, came after that registered letter was so blatantly disregarded. It wasn't just that she continued to park on my lawn, it was the way she did it now, with a smirk, with a little wave if she caught my eye. It was a deliberate, calculated display of dominance, a middle finger delivered via Toyota. She knew I'd sent a formal warning, she knew I was documenting, and she clearly believed herself untouchable, cocooned by her HOA presidency and her own formidable ego. One Saturday, after a rare but significant, for us, overnight shower, she'd parked her behemoth in its usual illegal spot. The ground, still soft beneath the grass, yielded under the Land Cruiser's considerable weight, leaving 2 deep, muddy ruts when she finally departed. Ruts that I, with a sigh that felt heavier than her vehicle, had to painstakingly fill with topsoil and reseed. Looking at that scarred earth, I felt something snap. Politeness had failed. Formal warnings had failed. The HOA was a sick joke. It was time for a more direct approach. Not malicious, mind you. Oh no, I wasn't about to stoop to vandalism. I was an engineer. I believed in elegant solutions, in using the laws of physics to my advantage. The idea that had been simmering now boiled over. My lawn, my lake, her car, a little bit of strategically applied H2O. The core concept was simple. Drastically reduce the coefficient of friction between her tires and my grass on the sloped section she favored. In layperson's terms, make it incredibly, deceptively slippery. The beauty of it, from an engineering and plausible deniability standpoint, was that I wouldn't be doing anything to her car. I would simply be intensively watering my own lawn. In a warm climate like ours, who could blame a man for wanting to give his grass an extra drink? especially if he was, say, concerned about a fictional new type of lawn grub that required extra moisture to eradicate. The planning phase began in earnest. I dusted off my old college physics textbooks, refreshing my memory on static versus kinetic friction, angles of repose, and the delightful chaos that ensues when a heavy object on an incline meets a low-friction surface. Her Land Cruiser, I looked it up, weighed roughly 800 pounds, a considerable mass. My lawn sloped at an average of 25 to 30 degrees in her preferred parking zone. The grass type was a hardy Bermuda, which, when wet and longish, could become surprisingly slick. My primary tool? My existing sprinkler system, with a few subtle modifications. I discreetly purchased a couple of extra rotating sprinkler heads, the kind you can stake into the ground, and ran thin camouflaged hoses from an underused spigot at the side of the house. These weren't permanent. They were for tactical deployment. My goal wasn't to create a visible swamp. That would be too obvious. Brenda wasn't stupid, just arrogant. It needed to look like a heavily dewed or recently watered lawn, but underneath that surface sheen, the soil itself needed to be saturated, offering no purchase. I spent a couple of early mornings, before the neighborhood stirred, experimenting on a less conspicuous part of my slope, adjusting water pressure, timing, and sprinkler patterns until I achieved the desired effect. A lawn that looked innocently damp but behaved like a well-greased slip and slide for anything heavier than a squirrel. Weather became my critical variable. I needed a string of clear, sunny days. Rain would ruin the surprise element and make it look like an act of God, not an act of Brenda parking where she shouldn't. I became an avid student of multiple weather forecasting apps, looking for that perfect 5-day window of uninterrupted sunshine. Legally, I ran the scenario past Mr. Blank Henderson during one of our chats over the fence. I didn't give him the full sprinkler saturation of doom plan, but I described the hypothetical. What if, I mused, one were to say overwater one's lawn significantly, and someone who had been repeatedly warned not to park there chose to do so anyway on a sloped section leading to an existing water feature? Mr. Henderson puffed his pipe, a shrewd glint in his eye. Mark, a man's entitled to water his lawn, excessively if he so chooses, and if an uninvited vehicle, whose operator has been duly warned of their trespass, encounters unforeseen topographical lubricity on private property, well, that sounds like a confluence of unfortunate choices on the part of the trespasser. He paused, then added, just make sure your liability insurance is up to date, and maybe have a camera running. Not that you'd expect anything, of course, just for posterity. His tacit approval, or at least his lack of outright condemnation, was all the green light I needed. I also made a bit of a show for a few days, leading up to S-Day, Slippery Day, by being conspicuously engaged in lawn rehabilitation. I rented an aerator and punched thousands of little holes in the lawn. I spread some organic fertilizer. Anyone watching, like perhaps Brenda from her monarchical perch, would assume I was just on a lawn care kick. This would provide excellent cover for the upcoming deluge. The waiting game was excruciating. Brenda, oblivious, continued her reign of parking terror. Each time her Land Cruiser defiled my grass, it just strengthened my resolve. I visualized the trajectory, the gentle yet unstoppable slide. I imagined her expression. It was becoming less about revenge and more about cosmic rebalancing. Finally, the forecast delivered. 5 glorious days of uninterrupted Southern California sunshine. No clouds, no chance of pesky rain muddying my carefully laid, or rather, carefully watered, plans. I rechecked my discreetly placed extra sprinkler heads, ensuring their arcs were perfectly calibrated to saturate Brenda's favorite unauthorized parking zone. I also made sure my own cars were parked snugly in my garage or far down the driveway, well away from the splash zone, as it were. The day before S-Day, I did one final, normal watering of the entire lawn in the evening. This was part of the camouflage. Everything had to appear routine, right up until the critical moment. That night, I confess, I didn't sleep much. Not from guilt, but from a strange mixture of anticipation and the kind of focused excitement an engineer feels before a critical systems test. This wasn't just about a car in a lake. It was about drawing a line, quite literally, and defending it with the only language Brenda Higgins seemed to understand: dramatic, inconvenient consequences. The stage was set. The physics were immutable. All I needed was for our leading lady to hit her mark. Day dawned bright and clear, the California sun already promising a warm, dry day, perfect conditions for what I privately termed Project Aqueous Calamity. I was up before sunrise, the air cool and still. My first act, after a strong cup of coffee, was to initiate the pre-soak. This involved running the regular sprinkler system across the entire front lawn for a slightly longer than usual cycle. This was for appearances, making the whole lawn look uniformly damp initially. Then, about an hour before Brenda's typical arrival time for her mid-morning visit to Mrs. Gable, I activated the special operations sprinklers. The two strategically placed, high-output rotating heads aimed squarely at the 10 by 20 foot patch of downhill grass she favored. I let them run for a solid 45 minutes. Not enough to create standing puddles that would scream, "Trap!" but more than enough to thoroughly saturate the topsoil and turn the dense Bermuda grass into a deceptively slick, almost frictionless surface. From a distance, it would just look like that section of the lawn was particularly well irrigated, perhaps still holding the morning dew. Up close, if one were foolish enough to drive a 2.5-ton SUV onto it, well, that would be a different story. Once the target zone was, in my professional opinion, optimally lubricated, I retrieved my supplementary sprinklers, coiled the hoses, and made everything look as if no special hydrological operations had occurred. Then I retreated to my observation post, my home office window, which offered a perfect unobstructed view. I set up my phone on a small tripod, angled to capture the entire scene, pressing record just for security purposes, of course. Mr. Henderson's advice about posterity echoed in my mind. I made myself look busy, papers spread on my desk, occasionally glancing out as if just daydreaming. The waiting was a peculiar kind of torture, a blend of nervous anticipation and grim satisfaction. Every car that drove past sent a little jolt through me. Right on schedule, like a malevolent cuckoo in a very expensive clock, Brenda Higgins' gleaming charcoal Land Cruiser rounded the corner. She was on her phone, naturally, one hand gesturing animatedly, the other casually guiding the behemoth. She didn't even glance at my lawn as she made the familiar turn, aiming her vehicle onto the grass with the practiced ease of someone who fundamentally believed the world was her asphalt driveway. My heart hammered. This was it. She navigated onto the lawn, her tires rolling onto the exact patch I had so lovingly prepared. For a horrifying second, nothing happened. The Land Cruiser settled, its powerful engine purring. Had I miscalculated? Was the slope not steep enough? Was the grass too grippy? And then it began. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. A tiny, almost elegant settling motion downwards. Brenda, still mid-conversation on her phone, probably attributed it to the suspension. Then the front wheels gave a little squelch. The downward motion became less settling and more sliding. Her head, previously tilted in rapt attention to her phone call, twitched. She looked out her windshield. I could see her brow furrow, even from my vantage point. She probably put the car in park, or maybe she hadn't even taken it out of drive. It didn't matter. Gravity, aided by my secretly supersaturated turf, had taken command. The Land Cruiser was now gliding, in what I can only describe as a stately, unhurried descent towards the shimmering blue of my lake. Her phone conversation abruptly ended. I saw her hands fly to the steering wheel, a futile gesture. There was no steering out of this. She wasn't driving. She was surfing on a wave of hydraulic impossibility. The slide accelerated, just a touch, as the full weight of the vehicle overcame the meager remaining friction. There was a soft, sickening thud as the front bumper met the decorative rocks I had at the lake's edge. then a much more distinct and rather wonderful kerplosh as the front wheels and a good portion of the grille submerged into the cool, welcoming waters. The vehicle tilted forward, its rear wheels pathetically spinning for a moment on the slick grass before it came to a halt, nose down in about 3 feet of water, looking for all the world like a very surprised, very expensive hippo taking an unplanned dip. Brenda's door flew open, the passenger side, as the driver's side was now angled awkwardly towards the water. She scrambled out, her expensive athleisure wear no doubt about to be tested by muddy lake banks. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, rapidly contorting into incandescent fury. "Mark!" she shrieked, a sound that could curdle milk at 50 paces. "Mark, you, what have you done?" I allowed a suitable pause for dramatic effect, then ambled out my front door, projecting an air of mild, neighborly concern. "Brenda? Good heavens! What on earth happened? Are you all right?" I called out, my voice carefully calibrated to convey innocent surprise. "My car!" she screeched, pointing a trembling accusatory finger at the half-submerged Land Cruiser. "Your stupid lawn! It's like an ice rink! You did this! You did this on purpose!" I ambled closer, feigning a puzzled inspection of the offending turf. "Brenda," I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy, "I simply watered my lawn this morning. It's my property, after all. It seems you chose to park on it again, despite my numerous written and verbal requests not to. Did you not notice it was damp?" I gestured to the quite visibly sodden grass around her car's futile escape tracks. The carefully constructed innocence in my tone seemed to infuriate her further. Neighbors were starting to emerge, drawn by the commotion. Old Mrs. Gable peered out her window, hand to her mouth. Mr. Henderson was already halfway across his lawn, a distinct twinkle in his eye that I'm sure only I appreciated. Brenda Higgins, HOA empress, stood sputtering, pointing between her slowly sinking status symbol and me, the picture of aggrieved bewilderment. The carefully planned, meticulously executed, and beautifully physics-driven culmination of Operation Slippery Slope was, if I may say so myself, a resounding success. The scene was chaotic, beautiful, and exquisitely just. Her multi-thousand-dollar SUV was rapidly becoming an artificial reef, and the architect of its aquatic doom was innocently inquiring if she'd noticed the morning dew. The immediate aftermath was a glorious spectacle of spluttering rage and logistical nightmares, mostly for Brenda. Her first instinct, after a torrent of accusations about sabotage, deliberate traps, and my general malevolence, was to call a tow truck. This process itself was a comedy of errors. The first tow company she called, upon hearing "car in a lake," on a sloped, very wet lawn, quoted her a price that made her shriek even louder than she had at me, then politely declined the job as too high risk for their standard equipment. The second company, a heavy-duty recovery specialist, finally agreed, but their arrival was hours away, and their subsequent assessment of the extraction challenge, maneuvering a massive tow rig onto my already compromised lawn without causing further sinking or damage, then winching out a waterlogged Land Cruiser, came with an eye-watering estimate. Brenda, pacing furiously on the relatively dry sidewalk, her expensive sneakers now caked in mud from her initial foray to inspect the damage, alternated between haranguing the tow dispatcher on her phone and glaring daggers at me as I helped by offering utterly useless suggestions like, maybe try rocking it? The actual extraction, when it finally happened late that afternoon, was an engineering feat in itself, involving multiple cables, strategically placed boards to try and distribute the tow truck's weight, and a lot of groaning from both the Land Cruiser and the increasingly exasperated tow operators. My lawn, needless to say, looked like a WWI battlefield by the time her soggy steed was finally dragged back onto solid asphalt, dripping water, mud, and what looked suspiciously like lily pads from its undercarriage. Brenda's insurance company, when she inevitably called them, was reportedly skeptical. Parking on clearly marked private property, after repeated warnings, on a visibly wet and sloping surface leading directly to a body of water, They apparently used terms like contributory negligence and avoidable incident. Her path to a quick no-fault claim was looking decidedly rocky. She even called the police, accusing me of criminal mischief. A bored-looking officer arrived, listened to her hysterical claims, then calmly listened to my side. I presented copies of my warning letters, pointed to my clearly defined property line, and explained that I'd merely been watering my lawn that morning, a perfectly normal homeowner activity. I even offered to show him my security footage of the sprinklers running. The officer, bless his stoic heart, seemed to grasp the situation perfectly. He informed Brenda that this appeared to be a civil matter, that there was no evidence of malicious intent on my part, and perhaps, just perhaps, she should avoid parking on other people's property in the future. He stopped short of writing her a trespassing ticket, but the implied warning was clear. The HOA fallout was, from my perspective, profoundly satisfying. Brenda, humiliated but still bizarrely convinced of her righteousness, tried to rally the board to censure me, fine me, perhaps even demand I fill in my lake as a community hazard. She convened an emergency HOA board meeting. This time, however, things were different. Before the meeting, I, along with Mr. Henderson's sagely advice, prepared a comprehensive package. It included copies of all my correspondence with Brenda, the HOA's original dismissive email, photographic evidence of her months of trespassing, a timeline of events, and a brief, factual account of the incident, carefully omitting any hint of my more proactive hydrological efforts. This package was delivered not just to the board members, Barry, the timid treasurer, and Sylvia, the startled secretary, but to every single household in Oakwood Creek. The narrative was clear. I was a homeowner defending his property rights against persistent abuse by the HOA president herself, abuse the HOA had previously ignored. At the meeting, which many residents attended, drawn by the scent of drama and my widely distributed information packet, Brenda's attempts to paint me as the villain fell spectacularly flat. Barry and Sylvia, usually her reliable rubber stamps, looked profoundly uncomfortable, acutely aware of the optics. Several residents, emboldened by my stand in Brenda's very public humiliation, the story of Lake Brenda and her amphibious Land Cruiser had spread like wildfire, stood up to voice their own long-simmering grievances about her autocratic reign. Mr. Henderson, in his calm, authoritative retired litigator's voice, gave a short, impromptu lecture on property rights, trespass, and the responsibilities of an HOA president, subtly shredding Brenda's arguments without ever raising his voice. Brenda's face went from red to purple. She had lost the room, she had lost her authority, and she was very much alone. There was no official censure of me. Instead, a motion was tabled by a previously quiet resident to review the HOA president's conduct and consider a vote of no confidence. The tide had turned. In the weeks that followed, Brenda Higgins became a shadow of her former imperious self. The financial hit from her Land Cruiser's swim was substantial. Her insurance eventually covered some of it, but with a hefty deductible and, I heard through the grapevine, a massive premium increase. She sold the now repaired but undoubtedly stigmatized Land Cruiser, at a significant loss, I imagine, and was seen driving a much more modest and significantly less amphibious sedan. She stopped her community beautification walkabouts. She stopped issuing frivolous violation notices. The vote of no confidence didn't quite pass. There were still a few loyalists, or perhaps just conflict-avoidant residents, but her power was irrevocably broken. She remained president in name only, a lame duck counting down the days until the next election, which everyone knew she wouldn't win if she even dared to run. She never parked on my lawn again. In fact, she wouldn't even make eye contact if we passed on the street. My lawn, after some intensive repair work, ironically paid for by a small anonymous donation to the HOA landscaping fund that Mr. Henderson might have facilitated after a chat with Brenda's embarrassed husband, recovered its former glory. As a preventative measure, I installed a lovely, low-slung fieldstone retaining wall along that edge of the lawn, transitioning into some robust, thorny bougainvillea near where the launch point had been. Beautiful, yet undeniably a boundary. The atmosphere in Oakwood Creek changed. People seemed more relaxed, less fearful of arbitrary HOA pronouncements. Other residents, inspired perhaps by the tale of the great car immersion, successfully pushed back on some of Brenda's more ridiculous prior rulings. The HOA started functioning more like a community support organization and less like a petty dictatorship. Was it worth it? Absolutely. The peace of mind, the quiet satisfaction of a problem ingeniously and justly solved, was priceless. It taught me that sometimes, even for a quiet aerospace engineer, a little bit of calculated earth and water-based engineering can go a long way in re-establishing necessary boundaries. And that's how my lawn, with a little help from applied physics and an overabundance of misplaced entitlement, became the scene of an HOA president's downfall. Thanks for all your comments, and for tuning in to hear how a patch of grass in sunny Southern California taught one Karen a very wet lesson. I hear she's actually avoiding water features altogether now, which is probably for the best.